Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this narration. The year was 1842 when Willow Creek Plantation stretched across 300 acres of Georgia soil. Colonel Jeremiah Thornton, feared even in Charleston society, had grown concerned about his only daughter, Eliza. At 19, she had become uncommonly large, her figure an embarrassment to his standing in society. When the household awoke to find Eliza missing one August morning, only a cryptic diary entry remained. "Father has given me to Solomon." What workers discovered beneath the willow trees 3 weeks later would remain undisturbed until 1967, when construction workers unearthed a small cedar box containing artifacts that would shatter the Thornton legacy forever. The Thornton name had been etched into Georgia society since 1794, when Jeremiah's father, a Revolutionary War veteran with connections to wealthy tobacco merchants, acquired the initial 100 acres through a land grant. According to county records preserved in the Savannah Historical Society, Jeremiah Thornton expanded this modest beginning through a combination of strategic marriages and brutal efficiency in plantation management, documented in his meticulous ledgers recovered during a 1953 renovation of the county courthouse. His first marriage to Elizabeth Harrington, daughter of a prominent judge, brought additional lands and social connections. His second, to Caroline Winslow of the Charleston Winslows following Elizabeth's death in childbirth, secured the financial backing to triple his holdings. A letter from Caroline to her sister in 1824, discovered in a family Bible in 1989, reveals Jeremiah's cold fury upon learning his only child would be a daughter. He stood at the window for nearly an hour without speaking, as though Providence had played a cruel jest upon his ambitions. This disappointment manifested in his treatment of young Eliza, who, according to household staff interviews conducted by the Georgia Historical Commission in the 1,950 seconds, was subjected to increasingly severe regimens to maintain the physical appearance Thornton deemed essential for securing an advantageous marriage. Plantation records show the hiring of 3 different European governesses between 1,835 and 1,840, each tasked with the proper physical development of the young mistress, yet each dismissed when Eliza's form continued to expand despite their efforts at restriction and exercise. By her 16th birthday, according to a physician's notes found in the Thornton family papers, the colonel had begun experimenting with more extreme measures, including fasting regimens and bitter herbal tonics that left the girl perpetually weakened and ill. The arrival of Solomon at Willow Creek Plantation in March of 1842 marked a significant turning point in the grim narrative that would unfold beneath the Georgia pines. Plantation acquisition records, discovered during a 1934 survey of antebellum commerce conducted by Emory University researchers, indicate that Colonel Thornton purchased Solomon at the Charleston slave auction for a sum considerably above market value, outbidding 3 other plantation owners in the process. What made Solomon unusual, according to the bill of sale preserved in the Georgia State Archives, was the notation describing him as literate with knowledge of medicines and treatments acquired from previous master, Dr. James Whitfield of Virginia. Solomon's arrival at Willow Creek was documented in the meticulous records Thornton maintained, with a curious entry noting the new slave should be quartered separately from the field hands until proper assessment of his claimed abilities can be verified. According to testimony from Isabel Jenkins, a house servant whose oral history was recorded by the Federal Writers Project in 1937, the colonel initially expressed skepticism regarding Solomon's medical knowledge, reportedly stating to his overseer that educated Negroes bring nothing but trouble to a well-ordered plantation. This reluctance, however, appeared to dissolve rapidly following a private interview in Thornton's study, after which Solomon was assigned quarters adjacent to the main house rather than in the slave cabins that dotted the far edge of the property. Jenkins's account described Solomon as a man of imposing height, with unusual quietness in his manner, his eyes always watching, calculating, like he was measuring everyone around him. Within weeks of his arrival, Solomon had been tasked with maintaining the household's medicinal garden, and preparing remedies for common ailments among both the enslaved workers and the plantation family. A letter from Thornton to a physician in Savannah, dated the 27th of April 1842, and discovered during a 1971 cataloging of medical correspondence, contained an unusual inquiry. The slave possesses remarkable knowledge of digestive complaints and treatments for corpulence acquired from his former master. I seek your professional opinion on whether such treatments might be safely administered to a young woman of gentle breeding whose condition has resisted all conventional approaches. By the spring of 1842, Eliza Thornton's position within the household had deteriorated significantly. As documented in fragments of her personal diary recovered from a hidden compartment in her writing desk during the 1967 excavation of the main house ruins. These pages, written in an increasingly unsteady hand between January and April 1842, chronicle the young woman's despair as she reached marriageable age yet attracted no suitable prospects from among Georgia's planter elite. According to entries dated February 12th, her father had paraded her before potential suitors at 3 separate society functions that winter, only to have each prospective match discreetly withdraw interest upon viewing her substantial figure. Father informed me at breakfast that Mr. Posterview, Holloway's son, has chosen to pursue a match with the younger Miss Pendleton instead. One entry reads, "He looked at me with such contempt I could scarcely swallow my tea," before announcing that perhaps no respectable man would burden himself with such a wife as I would make. The diary reveals increasingly severe restrictions placed on Eliza's diet, with Colonel Thornton ordering household staff to monitor her food intake and report any infractions. An entry from March 3rd describes her humiliation when her father interrupted a dinner party to snatch away her barely touched plate, announcing to the assembled guests that discipline clearly remains absent in certain quarters. This public degradation is corroborated by correspondence between Margaret Beaumont, mistress of the neighboring Magnolia Hill Plantation, and her sister in Savannah. In a letter dated March 17th, 1842, discovered during a 1978 cataloging of the Beaumont family papers, Mrs. Beaumont writes, "The Thornton girl's condition grows more pitiful with each passing month. She attends social gatherings only under her father's stern command, standing apart from other young ladies, her eyes downcast as though she might render herself invisible through sheer force of will." The letter continues with observations of Eliza's increasing isolation, noting that she speaks only when directly addressed, and even then in such hushed tones one must lean forward to catch her words. "I fear a profound melancholy has taken root in her spirit, deeper than the usual girlish sensitivities. Most revealing is a diary entry from April 9th, where Eliza writes, "Father summoned me to his study today to inform me that since conventional methods have failed, he has devised a new approach to my cure. He spoke of Solomon's expertise and a procedure that might render me acceptable at last." A letter discovered in the Charleston Medical Society archives during a 1982 digitization project revealed the full extent of Colonel Thornton's desperation to address his daughter's condition. Dated the 12th of April, 1842, the correspondence from Dr. William Hargrove to 3 of his colleagues warned them about Thornton's inquiries regarding experimental surgical procedures to reduce excessive corpulence. According to the physician's detailed account, Thornton had arrived unannounced at his Charleston office on April 4th, bringing with him several European medical journals, describing theoretical approaches to stomach reduction that had never been successfully attempted. I expressed in the strongest possible terms that such procedures would almost certainly prove fatal, given our current understanding of anatomy and infection, Dr. Hargrove wrote, yet the colonel persisted with disturbing determination, offering considerable financial inducement should I reconsider my position. The doctor concluded his warning by stating, "I believe this man may seek less scrupulous practitioners for this dangerous undertaking, and I urge you to decline should he approach you with similar proposals." Household account ledgers from mid-April show unusual purchases from a Charleston apothecary, including foreign herbs and compounds not typically stocked in plantation medicine cabinets. According to kitchen staff interviews conducted in 1952 by the Georgia Historical Society, Solomon began preparing special teas and tonics for Eliza's consumption, administered under the Colonel's direct supervision 3 times daily. Martha Wilson, a house servant whose testimony was recorded in these interviews, reported that Miss Eliza's meals grew smaller and stranger. Just broths with bitter-smelling herbs that Solomon would bring fresh from his garden each morning. During this period, the relationship between father and daughter grew increasingly strained. Multiple household witnesses reported overhearing heated exchanges behind the closed doors of the Colonel's study. Agnes Taylor, a laundress who worked at Willow Creek from 1838 to 1844, told interviewers that the shouting would end with Miss Eliza in tears, rushing to her room where she would remain for hours. Most telling was an entry in the Colonel's personal journal, discovered in a hidden compartment of his desk in 1971, which stated simply, "The girl continues to resist what is clearly in her best interest. If persuasion fails, more direct intervention will be required. S. assures me the procedure, while radical, has theoretical merit if precisely executed." The morning of August 7, 1842, marked Eliza Thornton's disappearance from Willow Creek Plantation, an event documented primarily through testimony collected from household staff during a subsequent county investigation, the records of which were discovered in 1959 during a courthouse renovation. According to Sarah Mitchell, Eliza's lady's maid, whose statement was recorded by the county sheriff, she arrived at Miss Thornton's chambers at the usual hour of 7 o'clock to find the bed unslept in and her mistress's nightclothes still carefully folded on the dressing table. Most disturbing, as multiple staff members independently confirmed, was Colonel Thornton's reaction when informed of his daughter's absence, a calm nod followed by the statement that she has gone exactly where she needs to be. The plantation's daily assignment ledger, preserved in the Georgia Historical Archives, reveals that 2 days prior to Eliza's disappearance, Solomon had been reassigned from his duties at the main house to a seldom-used cabin that stood in isolation near a grove of willow trees at the far eastern boundary of the property. This cabin, according to a survey map drawn in 1836, had originally served as a quarantine location during a typhoid outbreak and had remained largely abandoned since that time. The overseer's daily report noted the unusual instruction that Solomon was to remain at this location until further notice, and that no one is to approach or deliver messages without the Colonel's express permission. What has perplexed historians since the case's re-examination in the 1960 seconds was the stark contrast between the private and public response to Eliza's disappearance. Plantation records indicate that Thornton organized only a cursory search of the immediate grounds before declaring the matter closed, while his correspondence with business associates and social connections in the weeks that followed presented an entirely different narrative. A letter to his brother-in-law in Charleston, dated August 12 and discovered in family papers in 1975, mentioned that Eliza has gone to stay with Caroline's cousins in Savannah for the remainder of the summer, where the sea air may improve her constitution. This fabrication was maintained in all his social communications, even as no actual arrangements with relatives could ever be verified, and no stagecoach or riverboat manifests from the period showed any passenger matching Eliza's description departing from the region. The true nature of Eliza's fate began to emerge in 1967, when Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a researcher documenting antebellum women's experiences for Emory University, discovered a collection of loose diary pages concealed within the lining of a trunk recovered from the Thornton estate ruins. These fragile, water-damaged documents, dated between July 15 and August 6, 1842, revealed the horrifying ultimatum presented to Eliza in the weeks before her disappearance. "Father has made his final pronouncement," read an entry from July 18, the ink blurred by what appeared to be teardrops. "I am to submit to Solomon's treatment willingly, or be cast out without name or penny, to make my way as best I can in a world for which I have been given no preparation." Subsequent entries detailed Eliza's mounting terror as fragments of the proposed intervention became clear to her. "Today I overheard Father instructing Solomon about instruments to be procured from Charleston," she wrote on July 23rd. Solomon attempted to suggest alternatives, only to be silenced with threats I dare not commit to paper. Most revealing was an entry from August 1st, in which Eliza recounted a clandestine conversation with Solomon himself. "He came to me in the garden at great personal risk, speaking quickly while glancing toward the house. He claims Father has ordered him to perform some manner of surgery upon my person to reduce my size, something he learned of in medical journals from his previous master." Solomon's hands trembled as he spoke, and I saw in his eyes the same fear that has taken residence in my own heart. The final entry, dated August 6th, the night before her disappearance, contained the cryptic line later found by household staff: "Father has given me to Solomon. The procedure is to take place at dawn in the old quarantine cabin, far from where screams might be heard. Solomon has promised to make it as painless as possible, though he warns that few survive such interventions. If these words are found after my passing, know that Solomon acts not of his own will, but as a man whose own life hangs in the balance of his master's satisfaction. I go to my fate knowing that in this world, neither of us had any true choice." The grim discovery at the Willow Grove came precisely 3 weeks after Eliza's disappearance, documented in an overseer's report dated August 28, 1842, unearthed from county records in 1973. According to this hastily written account, field hands harvesting near the eastern boundary reported a most unwholesome stench emanating from the vicinity of the quarantine cabin where Solomon had been stationed. Upon investigation, the overseer discovered disturbing evidence of what he described only as medical activities of the most questionable nature, including blood-soaked linens, crude surgical implements, and a partially burned journal containing anatomical drawings. Most alarming was the discovery of a freshly disturbed patch of earth beneath the largest willow tree, though the overseer's report indicates he was expressly forbidden by Colonel Thornton from examining this area further. Plantation transaction records show that on August 30th, a mere 2 days after this discovery, Solomon was hastily sold to the Belafonte Plantation in Louisiana for a sum well below market value, a transaction that historians have been unable to verify through corresponding records at the supposed receiving plantation. A thorough examination of Louisiana purchase documents conducted in 1982 revealed that no slave matching Solomon's description was ever registered at Belafonte or surrounding properties, suggesting the sale was merely a paper fiction designed to explain his sudden absence. Concurrently with Solomon's disappearance, Colonel Thornton began circulating a new explanation for his daughter's extended absence. Correspondence to business associates in early September, recovered from the Charleston Historical Society archives in 1968, claimed that Eliza's delicate constitution has necessitated an extended stay with relatives, possibly stretching into the new year. A letter to his sister dated September 12th went further, suggesting that the girl's nervous disposition has manifested in concerning ways that may require specialized treatment at a private asylum in Virginia. These shifting narratives aroused little suspicion at the private time, as daughters of wealthy planters were frequently sent away for health, education, or marriage prospects. But the timing immediately following the discoveries at the Willow Grove would later be recognized by investigators as damning evidence of the Colonel's desperate attempts to conceal a far more sinister truth. The 1967 construction project that unearthed the small cedar box beneath the remains of the Willow Grove would dramatically alter historical understanding of the Thornton case, as detailed in the medical examiner's report filed with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation on September 15th of that year. Dr. Samuel Cartwright, a forensic pathologist tasked with analyzing the box's contents, documented with clinical precision the grim artifacts contained within. Several bone fragments, consistent with human ribs showing evidence of sawing with an imprecise instrument, a collection of corroded surgical tools including a bone saw and various knives of non-medical origin, and most significantly, sections of preserved human tissue that had been treated with a salt-based preservation method common in the 19th century. According to his analysis, the tissue samples exhibited clear evidence of crude incisions consistent with an attempted surgical procedure focused on the abdominal region. The nature of the incisions suggests an untrained hand attempting to replicate techniques described in early medical literature regarding stomach reduction, Dr. Cartwright noted, adding that hemorrhaging evident in the preserved tissues indicates the subject was alive during this procedure. The medical examiner's conclusion, though carefully worded, left little room for interpretation. The evidence strongly suggests an experimental surgical intervention aimed at reducing body mass through direct modification of the digestive organs, performed without proper medical knowledge, instruments, or sanitation, resulting in the subject's death, likely from blood loss or subsequent infection. This clinical assessment aligned disturbingly with correspondence discovered later that same year in the archives of Dr. James Harrington, a Charleston physician whose papers were being cataloged by the Medical University of South Carolina. 2 letters from Colonel Thornton, dated September 2nd and October 17th, 1842, made oblique but telling references to the procedure we previously discussed and unfortunate complications that necessitated discretion. The second letter contained the particularly damning passage, "I write to assure you that all evidence of our theoretical discussions has been permanently addressed, and the practitioner in question has been relocated to a position where his unusual knowledge will trouble us no further. I trust this concludes our association on this unfortunate matter." Dr. Harrington had apparently made no reply to either communication, but had preserved the letters, perhaps recognizing their potential significance as evidence of a crime. The most damning evidence against Colonel Thornton emerged in 1972, when a history doctoral student, Rebecca Johnson, discovered a water-damaged leather journal hidden within a hollow section of a support beam recovered from the quarantine cabin ruins during an archaeological survey of the Willow Creek property. This journal, authenticated by handwriting analysis as belonging to Solomon, contained detailed entries from July through August 1842 that revealed his forced participation in Colonel Thornton's grotesque scheme. Written in a precise hand that reflected his medical training, the early entries documented Solomon's increasingly desperate attempts to dissuade Thornton from his obsession with surgical weight reduction. "I have suggested once more the European water treatments and dietary regimens," read an entry dated July 12th, "only to be threatened with 30 lashes for my insolence. The Colonel will accept nothing less than the procedure he discovered in Dr. Whitfield's medical journals." Subsequent pages detailed Solomon's secret attempts to develop a safer approach, including diagrams of modified surgical techniques and lists of herbal preparations that might reduce surgical shock. Most disturbing were the entries describing his meetings with Eliza herself, in which he attempted to prepare her while concealing the full horror of what was planned. "I cannot bring myself to reveal the true nature of her father's intentions," he wrote on July 29th. "Yet I see in her eyes that she understands more than I have said." The journal reached its horrifying climax with entries from August 7th, documenting the procedure itself. "My hands tremble as I make the first incision across the poor girl's abdomen," Solomon wrote. "The Colonel stands watching, unmoved by her muffled screams despite the laudanum I administered. The instruments are wholly inadequate, crude kitchen knives and carpentry tools that tear rather than cut. I attempt to locate the stomach as described in the anatomical drawings, but blood obscures everything." The final pages described Eliza's death hours after the surgery. Despite Solomon's desperate efforts to stop the bleeding and fight the infection that rapidly took hold, she passed at sunset. "Her final words of forgiveness I cannot accept," read the last entry. The Colonel showed no emotion, stating only that I must bury her beneath the willows before dawn, and that any mention of these events would result in my own execution. The weeks following Eliza's death and Solomon's disappearance marked a period of subtle but significant changes at Willow Creek, documented through multiple independent sources later assembled by historians. Plantation financial ledgers, preserved in the Georgia State Archives, recorded unusual payments to 4 household staff members who departed service suddenly in September 1842, each receiving sums equivalent to 6 months' wages labeled as final settlement and considerations of discretion. These departures, notably including Eliza's lady's maid and 2 servants whose quarters afforded clear views of the path to the Willow Grove, coincided with the first appearance of troubling observations from neighboring properties. The journal of Emma Caldwell, mistress of the adjoining Oak Ridge Plantation, contained an entry dated August 8 recovered during a 1979 examination of the Caldwell family papers. Martha reports hearing terrible sounds from the direction of Willow Creek last night, a woman's screams carrying across the fields before falling silent near midnight. Colonel Thornton's explanation of coyotes seems inadequate, particularly given his daughter's curious absence from Sunday services. Business correspondence from the autumn of 1842 revealed a man increasingly untethered from his previous methodical nature. A cotton broker in Savannah wrote to his associate on October 3 that Thornton arrived for our meeting, visibly intoxicated at 11 in the morning, a shocking departure from his formerly fastidious character. The ledgers of the Charleston Gentlemen's Club, where Thornton had previously been known for moderation, recorded extraordinary bills for spirits throughout the fall of 1842, while meeting minutes noted 2 incidents of conduct unbecoming a member that resulted in temporary suspensions. Most telling was a letter discovered in the personal papers of Judge William Harrison, dated November 15, in which the judge described encountering Thornton on a road near the plantation. "I scarcely recognized the man I've known these 15 years, his appearance so altered by what I can only describe as a haunted aspect. When I inquired after Eliza's health, he stared through me as though I were a ghost myself before muttering that she weighs nothing now, and laughing in a manner that chilled me to my core." 6 months after Eliza's actual death, Colonel Thornton finally acknowledged her passing through an announcement in the county records dated February 12, 1843, discovered during a courthouse archival project in 1964. The document claimed Eliza had succumbed to a wasting fever while under the care of relatives in Savannah, though subsequent research revealed no record of her presence in that city's medical registries or private physician accounts. Parish records indicate a funeral was held at Willow Creek on February 20th, attended by a notably small gathering of local gentry despite the Thornton family's prominence. Margaret Beaumont's diary entry from that day, recovered in 1978, observed that the ceremony was unusually brief, with the sealed casket already lowered into the ground before guests arrived, denying friends even the customary viewing of the deceased. The gravestone, erected in the small Thornton family plot, bore only Eliza's name and the year 1843, lacking the customary birth date or biblical verse that typically adorned such monuments. While Colonel Thornton's performance of grief convinced most of society, documents discovered in 1985 within the archives of the Philadelphia Anti-Slavery Society revealed Solomon's fate and cast further suspicion on the official narrative. A report from an Underground Railroad conductor dated October 1842 described assisting a learned bondsman with medical training who fled Georgia after being forced to perform terrible acts against his conscience upon a plantation owner's daughter. The report noted that Solomon carried with him a small journal documenting the atrocity he was commanded to perform, which he presents as both evidence against his former master and confession of his own unwilling participation. Though the conductor recorded arranging Solomon's passage toward Canada, subsequent records show no further mention of him, suggesting he may have been captured or had adopted a new identity. Most telling was an 1844 letter from Thornton to the Charleston Police Commissioner requesting renewed diligence in the search for my runaway Solomon, who possesses dangerous knowledge and papers stolen from my household. The final piece of the Thornton case during the antebellum period emerged in October 1848, when local hunter Jebediah Morris stumbled upon partially exposed human remains near the eastern boundary of Willow Creek Plantation. County records, preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives and uncovered during a 1980 research project, detail the subsequent investigation by Sheriff Thomas Blackwell, who identified the remains as belonging to a male Negro of considerable height and strong build. While these characteristics matched Solomon's description, the sheriff's report noted the impossibility of positive identification, as the deceased appears to have been dead for approximately 1 to 2 years, with evidence suggesting predation by local wildlife. What drew historians' attention was the location of the discovery less than half a mile from the willow grove where Eliza's remains had been concealed. The investigation took an ominous turn when Sheriff Blackwell, according to county meeting minutes from November 1848, began questioning Colonel Thornton about discrepancies in his account of Solomon's sale to Louisiana. The clerk's notes recorded Thornton's visible agitation when presented with evidence that no such transaction had been registered with the receiving plantation. 3 days after this confrontation, Sheriff Blackwell was found dead in his home, a death hastily attributed to apoplexy, despite the deputy's observation. Preserved in his personal journal discovered in 1973 that the sheriff showed no previous signs of illness and had expressed concern for his safety following his interview with Colonel Thornton. Most damning was the timing of Thornton's substantial donation to the county treasury, recorded in financial ledgers just 1 week after Blackwell's death. The sum, equivalent to nearly $50,000 in modern currency, was earmarked for improvements to county services and administration of justice, with a notable stipulation that the current deputy sheriff, James Halston, be appointed as Blackwell's permanent replacement. County records show that under Halston's direction, the investigation into the discovered remains was formally closed on December 10, 1848. With the final report concluding that the deceased was likely a runaway who perished from exposure, despite evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull documented in the initial examination. The cedar box discovered during the 1967 construction project underwent extensive forensic analysis at the University of Georgia's newly established Historical Archaeology Department, with findings published in the American Journal of Forensic Anthropology in October 1968. This analysis revealed a collection of items that together painted a devastating picture of Eliza's final hours and Solomon's desperate attempts to save her. The box contained 6 crude surgical implements, including a modified carpenter's saw and 3 kitchen knives that had been sharpened to serve as scalpels, all bearing traces of human blood later confirmed through serology testing to be consistent with a female subject. Nestled among these instruments was a small gold locket containing a miniature portrait of a young woman identified through comparison with Thornton family records as Eliza, alongside a lock of dark hair secured with a faded blue ribbon. Most significant were the 11 pages of medical notes written in Solomon's distinctive hand, preserved through his careful application of beeswax to the paper, detailing his frantic efforts to control hemorrhaging following the initial incisions. Blood loss excessive despite pressure application. One entry read, "Patient weakening rapidly. Have requested permission to summon Dr. Harrison from neighboring plantation." But Master refuses. Archaeological examination of the quarantine cabin site in 1969 provided contextual evidence supporting these notes, revealing a disturbed area where medicinal herbs known for their coagulant properties had been hastily harvested, their roots left exposed in what botanists determined was a midsummer disruption. Carbon dating of a blood-stained piece of linen found within the box placed it precisely in the summer of 1842, while microscopic examination revealed the presence of 2 distinct blood types, suggesting both Eliza and Solomon had bled onto the fabric. Most poignant among the box's contents was a scrap of paper bearing a single line in Eliza's handwriting. "If you find this, know that Solomon tried to save me from my father's will." The carefully sealed nature of the cedar box, lined with pitch to protect its contents from moisture, indicated Solomon's deliberate creation of a time capsule of evidence, perhaps buried during the brief period between Eliza's death and his own disappearance, a final act of witness to the tragedy in which he had been forced to participate. The comprehensive investigation into the Thornton case began in earnest in 1992, when Dr. Elaine Montgomery of Emory University secured a grant to digitize and cross-reference all known documentation related to Willow Creek Plantation. This 5-year project, drawing on materials from 17 different archives across Georgia and South Carolina, revealed disturbing patterns that had previously gone unnoticed when examining records in isolation. Plantation ledgers from 1,830 through 1,842, when analyzed chronologically, showed that Solomon was not the first of Thornton's slaves to mysteriously disappear after private interactions with the colonel. 7 other instances were documented where individuals were recorded as sold or died of illness, yet left no corresponding records of sale or burial. Most notably, 3 of these cases involved slaves with some degree of medical knowledge, suggesting Thornton's preoccupation with finding someone to perform his daughter's procedure predated Solomon's arrival by several years. Evidence of the colonel's long-term obsession with surgical weight reduction emerged through his library acquisition records, discovered in a Charleston bookshop's customer ledgers during a 2001 archival project. These records showed that between 1,836 and 1,842, Thornton had purchased no fewer than 14 European medical texts dealing with digestive disorders and experimental surgical techniques, including an 1,831 French monograph describing theoretical approaches to stomach reduction that had never been attempted on living patients. DNA analysis conducted in 2003 on bone fragments from the cedar box confirmed their relation to the Thornton family line, definitively linking them to Eliza through comparison with samples from Thornton descendants who provided material for testing. The investigation also uncovered correspondence between Thornton and 3 different physicians in Charleston, Savannah, and Augusta between 1,838 and 1,842, all containing inquiries about surgical interventions for excessive corpulence, and all receiving negative responses, emphasizing the fatal risk of such procedures given medical knowledge at that time. Dr. Montgomery's final report, published in the Southern Historical Review in 2007, concluded that Colonel Thornton's determination to restore his daughter's marriageability through surgical means represents one of the most disturbing intersections of antebellum patriarchal authority, medical experimentation, and the exploitation of enslaved individuals' skills under duress, a perfect storm of cultural forces that resulted in a premeditated medical homicide. The final chapter in the Thornton tragedy emerged in 2010, when researchers documenting the history of the Dawn Settlement, a 19th-century community of escaped slaves in Ontario, Canada, discovered a sealed letter within the foundation stones of one of the settlement's original structures. The document, authenticated through handwriting analysis and dated the 12th of April 1859, was written by Solomon 17 years after the events at Willow Creek, and addressed poignantly to the spirit of Miss Eliza Thornton. In this remarkable testament, Solomon recounted his harrowing escape following Eliza's death, traveling northward through the Underground Railroad network until reaching Canada in January 1843. "I carried the burden of your death with me across every mile," he wrote, "haunted by the knowledge that my hands, though forced by your father's command, were the instruments of your destruction." The letter confirmed details previously pieced together by historians while adding crucial context. Colonel Thornton had researched the procedure for years, collecting medical texts and experimenting on livestock before purchasing me specifically for my medical knowledge. When I suggested safer alternatives to reduce your suffering, he placed a pistol against my temple and promised that my death would merely result in another being forced to attempt the procedure with even less skill. Solomon described how Thornton had stood watch throughout the entire 5-year operation, preventing him from administering sufficient laudanum to ease Eliza's pain and refusing to send for proper medical help even as her condition deteriorated. Most devastating was Solomon's account of Eliza's final moments. "You squeezed my hand as the fever took hold and whispered that you forgave me. understanding that we were both victims of your father's monstrous pride. In 17 years of freedom, I have found no peace worthy of your generosity." The letter concluded with Solomon's revelation that he had buried the cedar box containing evidence of the crime before fleeing, in hopes that someday the truth would emerge and your story would be known. This extraordinary document, now preserved in the Canadian Black Historical Society, provided the final confirmation of what had long been suspected, that Eliza Thornton's death resulted from an experimental weight loss surgery forced upon her by her father and performed by an enslaved man who spent the remainder of his life seeking atonement for actions he had been powerless to refuse.